If you're like me, you're trying to figure out who the heck is going to make the Super Bowl this year out of the NFC and the AFC. And I think there are a lot of contenders being thrown around there, but I think the best way to go about it is to use stats and look at the prior Super Bowl history in teams' performance to try to figure that out. I've made this video in the past seasons, and I think it's been a lot of help, and I'm going to continue doing it going forward. So let's take a look at the stats and try to ascertain who are the best picks from each conference to make it to the Super Bowl. I'm looking at stats, and what I'm looking at is just really common statistics on ESPN, looking at offensive yards per game, defensive yards per game, offensive points per game, and defensive points per game, looking at the last 24 Super Bowls and seeing what the candidates, and really in here, what the winners of the Super Bowl finished in each of these metrics. And my quick takeaway from this, you can pause the video, look at all the stats, create your own takeaways, is that there's a few key things that you're going to want to hone in on to pick a Super Bowl champion. For me, it's either you have to pick a team that's either top 5 in either offensive points per game or defensive points per game in the regular season. 79% of the time, the last 24 Super Bowls, the winner has had one of those two metrics in the top 5 in the regular season. And then if I'm looking at top 5 finish in either offensive points per game or defensive points per game, you can see that the defensive points per game top 5 finish has been a little bit more valuable when it comes to Super Bowl champions, 12 times versus 10 times for the offensive points per game. So I'm looking here for a team that is top 5 in either offensive points per game or defensive points per game and weighting it a little bit more heavily towards the defensive side of things. It doesn't happen often where a team is top 5 in both offensive points per game and defensive points per game. But if and when that does happen, on the rare occasion, they always make the Super Bowl with one exception, the Lamar Jackson Ravens. They have done it twice over the past 5 seasons, both Lamar Jackson's MVP seasons, and he has failed to make the Super Bowl. But other than that, teams that finished top 5 in both offense and defensive points per game have made the Super Bowl. And I'll take a look at where the playoff teams ranked out and shook out last year, pulling this from the video last year. You can see that, Ravens 4th offensive points per game, 1st in defensive points per game, failed to make it. And you can see what the Chiefs did here. Again, top 5 in defensive points per game. Not in offensive points per game. They struggled there, much like they're doing this season. But you could see that with the yards they put up and how good their defense was last year and how good it was this year, they were able to win the Super Bowl last year. It also helps that they have Patrick Mahomes. And then you look at the NFC last year, like I said, top 5 in offensive and defensive points per game. That was the 49ers. That was the prediction, and that is what happened from the NFC. So I'm looking at really the offensive points per game and defensive points per game metrics from these current playoff teams. When I'm looking here, again, honing in on a top 5 finish in one of the 2 categories. Now, using that, you can quickly eliminate 2 teams, that being the Texans and the Steelers. I think those guys were eliminated in probably a lot of people's list. I don't think many people have faith in the Broncos there, although their defensive points per game is stellar. And I think that it really gets whittled down to the Bills, Chiefs, or Ravens when I think there's not a lot of faith in the Chargers. Although they have a great defensive team and, again, number 1 in defensive points per game. But the offense being 11th overall in points per game and then 19th in yards per game, I think it's going to really hurt them when you start to go up with some teams like the Ravens and the Chiefs that have really stout defenses. Again, I said I put a little bit more weight on the defensive side, so that would point you to the Chiefs. But if I'm looking to bet and get a little bit of value in my odds, I'm probably not taking the Chiefs, given that they're only about just coming in on less than 4-1 odds there. I really like the Ravens here because they're a top 10 in both offensive points per game and defensive points per game. And if you've been watching the Ravens this season, you've seen that defensive unit, especially in terms of points per game and yards per game, has been improving with each game this season. You got the Bills here, who are great offensively, and everyone knows their prowess. But this 11th best defensive points per game and a pretty tough yards per game there, I think might get them in trouble, as they're probably going to face the gauntlet of if they beat Denver I'm predicting that they're going to have to play the Ravens next and then the Chiefs. That's a pretty tough road. I like the Ravens to, similar tough road, but I like the Ravens a little bit more of that situation where I think that their offense can hang with the Bills. And then we've seen the Chiefs go step for step with the Ravens. The Ravens go step for step with the Chiefs earlier this season. So I think what I like here is the Ravens for the value that you're getting if you're trying to bet. Obviously, if you're making a prediction, we saw the Chiefs, what I just flashed up on the previous slide. They were 3rd in defensive points per game last year and 13th in offensive points per game last year. Not too far off from where they are this season. And that's what was able to get it done for them last year to win a Super Bowl. So I think there's a lot of talk on the Chiefs offense and saying that they don't have the offensive output to succeed this year. And I don't think this team is that much different, at least from a statistical standpoint, than they were last year. Obviously not being able to crack the 30 points per game mark is tough. And I think all the more reason to take the Ravens here if they have one of the more dominant offenses, number 1 in yards per game here, and a great defense behind them. And then looking at the NFC here too, again, none of these teams are finishing top 5 in both offensive and defensive points per game, so don't really have any automatic qualifiers here like we did last year with the Ravens and the 49ers. Again, looking for top 5 finishes in either one of those two, that would eliminate the Packers and the Rams, with the rest of the teams barely hanging on. You look at, and I said there's a heavier weight to this defensive points per game stat, just seeing that if you were at top 5 in either one, it's more likely that the top 5 in the defensive points per game is going to get you that Super Bowl win. And I think just the anecdotal piece of evidence that defense wins championships consistently rings true. And it's really tough with the poor defense to get it done. In this Washington and this Tampa Bay defense, coincidentally playing each other in the first round, have been pretty poor all year long. And, maybe gotten a little bit better towards the end of the season, but I don't think their offensive production is enough to mitigate how those defensive units have been structured and how they've been playing this year. So to me, that leaves the Vikings, Eagles, and the Lions. I think a lot of people got scared off of the Lions in that last game against Detroit, seeing a little bit of their true colors with Sam Darnold, having some errant throws under some pressure in a high situation, high pressure game. And then the fact that these Vikings have to go on the road and play against a red-hot Rams team that is looking really solid right now. Stats don't look great. Don't think the Rams can win the Super Bowl given these stats. But they're only a 1-point underdog at home. So just given the fact that it's such a close game and given the fact that the Vikings really struggle with the Lions, I would be avoiding them here. What it comes down to is a very similar, equal and opposite tail of the tape between the Lions and the Eagles. As we all know, the Lions, one of the best offenses in football, 1st in points per game, and a really solid defense, even without Aiden Hutchinson. Defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn kind of showed you in that Sunday night game against the Vikings what him and his unit are capable of. For the Eagles, pretty solid offense, 7th in points per game, and then a 2nd best defensive points per game. If you want to look up a little bit, a couple rows, and look at just the yardage per game, the huge difference in the defensive yards allowed. Number 1 for the Eagles, also the best coverage unit in the game. And then defensive yards per game for the Lions, very, very different, with the 20th best defensive yards per game. So a little bit of bend, don't break strategy for the Lions on defense, which you've seen work out for them. It's a really tough pick there. I think for the value, you definitely should be on the Eagles as opposed to the Lions. The Lions are not even getting 3-1 odds with their current situation. I just think that's not juicy enough to entice me to take that bet. But if you're going purely from a prediction standpoint, I think it's hard to go against the Lions here, given the fact they look so dominant all year long. And even with injuries to most of their key positions, they continue to get it done with some great coaching and play calling on both sides of the football. So for me, based on what I said, I would take the Lions to come out of the NFC and the Ravens to come out of the AFC based on those statistics that I presented. The bet on DraftKings right now for this matchup is about plus 1,000. If you like the Lions to beat the Ravens, that's going at plus 1,500. So I think a pretty good value here if you're trying to parlay the NFC and AFC winner and even pick the exact outcome of the Super Bowl. I think this is the matchup to do it. I think if you're going to substitute one of these two teams, I would take out the Lions and throw in the Eagles. I really like the Ravens this year, as I think you got a lot of playoff pedigree with both the head coach John Harbaugh, who's won a Super Bowl before, Lamar Jackson, who is playing MVP caliber football and has high expectations again going into this season. What's really been the Achilles heel for the Ravens has been the Chiefs and their inability to get past them. I think with the number 2 in yards per game in the league and one of the most prolific offenses, that'll be enough, given their stout defense as well, to beat the Chiefs and finally surpass them. For the Lions, I'm predicting them to be playing the Eagles in the NFC Championship, and it's really going to be a factor of, I think, the defenses more so than the offenses. Is that Lions defense that is averaging or ended up at the 20th best defensive yards per game? Are they going to let Saquon Barkley, Mr. 2K, and that Eagles defense or offensive line plow them over and run the ball all over them, playing a similar style of football that the Lions have played? Additionally, Jared Goff has been very comfortable behind the best offensive line in football, bar none, picking apart defenses. We haven't seen him struggle too much. We haven't seen them that offensive line let up a big pass rush. What's going to happen against that Eagles team when the Eagles have the second best pass rush in football according to PFF and the best coverage unit? If they can get pressure on Goff and play really tight, stingy coverage, I'm not so sure the Lions make it out of that game. It's going to be really close, and so I think you could flip-flop the Lions for the Eagles here. I think for the sake of what I think is the most realistic, though, given that the Eagles have the Lions have the first round bye, I think that this is the pick I'm going to run with, and we'll see how it goes in a few weeks, but I really like the Ravens here out of the AFC, and as much as I hate to pick a chalky pick, it's hard to look past the Lions here. They seem like the team of destiny this season, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a team that can stop them. But that's all for me. Let's have a great playoffs. Keep taking a look at our other videos. We got wildcard predictions. We're going to keep having predictions and game picks each step of the way in these playoffs, and we hope to see you there every step of the way with us.